What happens when an HOA president tries to evict a land inspector from land he owns legally? She learns the hard way. She gave me 72 hours notice to take down my own cabin. No knock, no hearing, just a patronizing notice and a smile, as if she'd already prevailed. But the instant she tried to prohibit me from my own house, she stepped over a line no policy could protect her from. If this sounds familiar, share your story in the comments. My name's Thomas, I'm 58. Worked 35 years as a county land inspector in California. After retiring, moved into my dad's cabin on Pine Lake, part of a 50-acre property he bought in 1985 to develop a peaceful, community-minded subdivision. That dream kept going for a while, until Margaret Thompson showed up. 3 years ago, age 52, she was voted HOA president, and everything changed. She turned the HOA into her personal dictatorship. No laundry lines. No flowers without approval. Even house paint required a permit. Most neighbors kept their heads down, but I'd spent a lifetime dealing with bureaucratic overreach. Margaret picked the wrong man to bully. It all started with a sunflower. I put one seed one afternoon in front of my porch. Something cheerful to greet me every morning. The next morning, Margaret shows up with clipboard, that chiseled smile stuck on her face, and told me I'd need HOA approval for landscaping alterations. I told her no thanks, informed her it was my own property. I'd plant what I pleased. That's when the smile left her face, and the harassment began. Monday, $200 fine for inappropriate vehicle positioning. My trusty old pickup truck in the same position for 3 years, on my own land. Wednesday, $300 ticket for illicit extrusion of building material. My makeshift fishing chair on the shores of the lake. Friday, $150 fine for non-compliant exterior paint color. My cabin's natural wood color hadn't changed since being built. Each notice was preceded by escalating enforcement and community standards. I had seen intimidation like this before, only now it was personal, so I started keeping records, photos, timestamp videos, copies of every citation. I looked into the HOA bylaws and original land contracts my dad signed. Margaret escalated. She called an emergency HOA meeting and didn't invite me. There she portrayed me as a troublemaking, unstable man who wouldn't obey simple rules. The damage was done. Neighborhoods I had known for years would no longer talk to me. Mrs. Garcia stopped waving from the front yard. Tom Johnson, the guy who had shown up at my barbecue with ribs, would not even look at me. Margaret would just whisper that I was dangerous, that I was depreciating property, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. While she spread gossip, I set up additional cameras and did some digging in public records. I'd had decades of land law experience, and she just entered my territory. Next came the police. Margaret accused me of having threatened her in a phone call about her jurisdiction. Officers showed up. I peacefully led them to the security footage. Me on my porch, asking courteous questions of law. No threats, just facts. The police report backfired. One officer, Martinez, pulled me aside. "We get calls like this more than you'd think. Power makes people forget the law. Keep documenting everything." But Margaret wasn't finished. She had my mailbox removed, claiming it didn't meet current standards. Ordered crews to cut branches from my oak tree, insisting they were overhanging common property. Never mind the tree sat squarely on my land. It was a psychological siege. Not illegal, perhaps, but meant to wear me away. Margaret was expecting me to pack up and go. She had no idea I was only getting started. The final straw came one Saturday. I returned from town and found my fence to the garden knocked down. My sunflower, the one that started this whole thing, chopped down. Taped to my front door was a final notice of warning. 72 hours to voluntarily demolish non-compliant structures, or the HOA would proceed with enforcement. My cameras captured it all. Margaret, 3 men, her voice on tape. This old man needs to learn his place. I sat down that night, staring at the broken fence and empty dirt where my sunflower once stood, and I smiled. Margaret had just made this legal. I opened the safe where I kept my father's original documents and made a call I'd been holding for 40 years. James Morrison, the attorney at law who helped my dad negotiate the land sale. James was 72 years old, but quicker on the draw than most people half his age. I told him the entire tale, and he half laughed. "David," he said, "I've waited 40 years to hear those words." We sat for 3 hours and discussed the lease agreement, and every clause supported what I felt. Margaret's HOA didn't have authority over me or my cabin. In 1985, my father had leased 45 of the 50 acres to the HOA for $1 a year, a symbolic act in support of affordable community development. But there was a clause in that lease. I could raise the rent to fair market value on 30 days' notice. Today, that land was selling for $10,000 per acre a year. That's $450,000 a year Margaret now owed me, and the whole HOA clubhouse, pool, and walking trails sat on my property. James drafted the rent increase notice. I assembled all the proof: harassment, phony reports, damage to my property, all chronicled with video from cameras, time-stamped and quoted. But I wasn't done. As a former county inspector, I conducted a full review of the HOA's activities. What I discovered was more horrible than I could have dreamed. Unauthorized buildings constructed without a permit on my property, misuse of HOA money, several HOA laws broken in the state. Margaret believed she was above the law. She believed wearing the badge was a way to rule. But true power resides in understanding the law and refusing to back down when bullies knock on your door. The rent will be due in 30 days. And this time, Margaret is going to find out the hard way. When you try to evict a man from his own house, make certain he doesn't own the dirt you're standing on. Margaret broke the lease. That's it. She increased HOA dues from $200 to $400 a month. Without a vote, she used $15,000 from the community account to landscape her own yard. And the worst of it? She faked meeting minutes, created fake signatures, and threatened residents with fines if they didn't elect her as their HOA representative. She wasn't a control freak. She was running a criminal enterprise disguised as leadership. But the turning point came a night when Robert Thompson, Margaret's husband, arrived at my doorstep. He was exhausted, defeated. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I cannot sit here and watch this any longer. Margaret's not the same wife I married. Powers made her. Cruel." He told me how she'd gotten paranoid, controlling all conversations, checking his phone, exploding into rage when her HOA actions were questioned. And then he handed me a USB drive. "This is all of it," he whispered. "Proof of election fraud, financial mismanagement. She even forged signatures to become president. And here," he handed me photocopied emails. "Here's the list of families she blackmailed. She threatened to fine them if they didn't vote for her." It was the final piece of the puzzle, and it was devastating. I told attorney James Morrison everything. A notice of rent increase, increasing the HOA's lease from $1 per year to $450,000. Market value. A civil lawsuit against Margaret for property damage, harassment, and emotional distress. A criminal complaint for vandalism and financial impropriety. And lastly, a properly noticed emergency meeting request under HOA bylaws to address the urgent concerns of community survival. But I left it there. One of my sources led me to meet Sarah Kim, a local investigative reporter who specialized in exposing HOA abuse. "Folks are fed up with dictators hiding behind neighborhood regulations," she told me. "This is the story our readers demand." Sarah did some research and discovered that Margaret had pulled the same games in her previous neighborhood. Grievances about her bossy management style dominated online discussion boards. This was no longer about me anymore. It was a trend, and people had to realize that. I sent official letters to all 67 houses in Pine Lake. The subject: urgent, land ownership and community future. Margaret called me an hour later, apoplectic about my unauthorized meeting. I calmly reminded her, "Any member of the community has the right to request an emergency session when significant community interests are at stake." At 7 p.m. Wednesday night, the community center was filled to capacity. 89 people were crowded into a 50-seat room. Even neighbors from nearby blocks came out. Rumors about HOA scandals travel fast. Sarah Kim and her cameraman anchored at the rear, cameras at the ready, protected by public meeting laws. Margaret was late, fat folder in hand, ready to control the message. She had no idea her reign was already over. When the room was quiet, I stepped forward. I'd like to ask an easy question, I began. How many of you are aware of who owns the property Pine Lake is built on? The room buzzed with confused murmurs. Margaret blanched. Margaret, I shot back, standing over her, if you're so interested in property rights and community values, maybe you could enlighten everyone as to who owns the deed to the 45 acres this community sits upon? She did not answer, so I waved a leather folder in the air. Let me properly introduce myself. I am Thomas, son of Robert Miller, who purchased this entire 50-acre tract back in 1985. I'm the landlord. You've rented this land from me at a cost of $1 a year since this colony was founded. Gasps spread throughout the room. Margaret looked like she had seen a specter. I connected my laptop and began my presentation. Security video was first. Margaret directing men to destroy my fence and sabotage my sunflower. Her voice was unmistakable. This old man needs to know his place. Financial records were next. $15,000 in invoices for landscaping charges to the HOA, but spent landscaping her own yard. Records of unauthorized HOA fee increases. Faked meeting minutes and signatures. With each slide came gasps, outrage, and shock from the audience. Then I revealed the threatening messages, thanks to her own husband. One by one, messages came forward where Margaret threatened fines, court action, and even eviction for those who questioned her. Mrs. Garcia was the first, tears welling up in her eyes. Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. Margaret told us you were dangerous, said you threatened people. I was afraid. She blew her nose. She said I'd be fined for inquiring about the budget. Then there was Tom Johnson standing, my old barbecue buddy. She fined me $800 because my kids were on the grass after 6 p.m. We had to cut groceries just to pay it. Next was Lisa Park, a single mom of 2. She said my kids would be kept off the playground if I didn't vote for her. She said troublemakers don't belong in Pine Lake. They stood up one by one to speak, hassling, manipulation, and financial intimidation, all in Margaret's self-styled leadership. Margaret finally lost it. You're being manipulated. I worked day and night to make this a better place. Every rule I set was for your own good. Her face flushed, fingers shaking around the room. This old man is trying to destroy everything we've done. I remained calm. Margaret, I said, what exactly have you actually done? A neighborhood where children can't play outside past 6 p.m.? Where it gets you penalized for planting a flower? Where families are going hungry because of your arbitrary fines? She shouted, you have no right to embarrass me in front of everyone. I'm not embarrassing you, I told her. Your actions are doing that all on their own. And in her most defiant moment, yelling about her title, her power, and her presidency, she'd never appeared more helpless. As an outside observer, Sarah Kim spoke to the audience, I've written about dozens of HOA controversies all over the state, but what I've witnessed here tonight is one of the clearest, most unsettling examples of abuse of power I've ever seen. Mr. Miller has every right to end the community lease in its entirety. The room went silent. Reality set in. Pine Lake could be torn down in one night if I were to use my landowner rights. That wasn't what I had planned, though. I do not want to uproot families or tear down houses, I told them, but we do need new leadership. Leadership that serves, not controls. The vote of no confidence was overwhelming. 64 residents voted to remove Margaret from all HOA positions. Only 2 opposed it, with 1 abstaining. A wave of visible relief swept over the room. Their 3-year ordeal was at an end. Margaret was silent. She quietly gathered up her folder of papers and departed, preceded by the subdued, uncomfortable looks of the people she had terrorized for so long. Her husband, Robert, stayed behind. He apologized to family after family and promised to help recover the misused community funds. He looked like a man finally shaken loose from his wife's poison spell. Mrs. Garcia was elected unanimously as interim HOA president. A retired elementary school principal with 30 years of leadership under her belt, she was the complete opposite of everything Margaret was. Thoughtful, fair, and cooperative. Her first formal action was to formally apologize to me as a member of the community and to ask my opinion in creating open, ethical HOA policies. That night, Sarah Kim's story aired on the local ABC channel. In a few hours, there were hundreds of viewers across the state who sent in their own stories of HOA misbehavior. Our article had become a badge of successful resistance, a call to arms for homeowners across the country. With the help of Mrs. Garcia, the transformations came swiftly and powerfully. HOA charges were reduced from $400 to $250 a month. A line item budget was given to every home. Any spending over $500 now required community-wide endorsement. Monthly budget reports were mailed to each resident. The strangling regulations Margaret had implemented? Gone. Residents now enjoyed the liberty to plant flowers without permits, hang clothes on the line, allow children to play outside until 8 p.m., not 6. The transformation was sudden. Fear and silence gave way to laughter and cooperation. Margaret and Robert's divorce accelerated quickly. Custody of their 2 teenage sons was awarded to Robert, ashamed of their mother's behavior. Margaret was instructed to sell her house to repay the $15,000 she had stolen from community funds, pay damages of $5,000 for vandalizing my property, serve 100 hours of court-supervised community service at a homeless shelter, take anger management classes, agree to a permanent ban from ever serving on any HOA board within the state. Perhaps most rewarding of all, she resigned from Pine Lake of her own accord. Unable to bear the community she had formerly dominated, she relocated to Florida to reside with her sister. Meanwhile, Robert stayed on, determined to make things right. He was a respected member of the community, particularly with the children and families his wife used to harass. Sarah Kim's follow-up story, The $1 Landlord Who Fought Back, went viral, garnering over 2 million views across platforms. Our local struggle had hit a national nerve. I received hundreds of emails from people across the nation, sharing HOA nightmare stories and asking for advice. Dozens of attorneys called us to base their case on ours, using it as a court precedent. The momentum brought about real change. California passed the Pine Lake Amendment, requiring transparency in HOA financial reports, reasonable appeals processes for fines, state monitoring when abuse complaints reach a predetermined threshold. A local dispute turned into a statewide movement toward reform. Homes in Pine Lake sold 15% higher, not because of more stringent regulations, but because people wanted to live in a place defined by cooperation, respect, and justice. There was a 3-month waiting list for Pine Lake homes, with buyers specifically citing our system of governance and sense of community as factors in deciding to purchase. I worked with Mrs. Garcia to counsel other distressed neighborhoods how to revamp or eliminate toxic HOAs. Tom Johnson and I started a monthly skills class for children of the neighborhood, and Lisa Park was elected to City Council, carrying our cooperative philosophy into city halls. Now, 2 years after that historic stand, I sit in the same wooden chair Margaret had sought to have destroyed. Before me, a community garden shared by 15 families. In the center, a row of sunflowers, tall, yellow, and growing proudly where I once had a solitary one. We commemorate it as Sunflower Day, the anniversary of our community's rebirth. A small hand-carved wooden plaque on my cabin door. Robert made it himself. Thomas, community friend. But the name I treasure most isn't written. It's the sound of children at dusk on the grass. It's the sight of neighbors talking over fences, not hiding behind them. It's knowing that the vision my father had when he bought this land 40 years ago has finally come true. Margaret tried to turn me into the bad guy, but in trying to kill me, she revealed to the world what she was actually made of and helped me become something much greater. We learned that true power does not come with titles, threats, or control. It is forged in service, integrity, and the ability to stand alone until others join you. Because sometimes the person who says the least in a room ends up being the strongest. And sometimes what it takes to restore a community is a single sunflower. Ever had to fight an out-of-control HOA? Share your story below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This is only part 1.